Hello and welcome to Vendor Trash. Is the title a reference to my opinions, my drawing skills, or both? That's for you to decide. We're back to the dungeon rankings this week and have moved back in time to Battle for Azeroth. Now, I did do Mythic Plus back in BFA, but in a very casual sense. Because the Great Vault had not yet been implemented, your weekly reward was a single random piece, and thus not as lucrative to earn. It was only once Season 4 added a mount reward to Keystone Master that I cared. Prior to that, I only really ran it when abducted by guildies, and that usually meant doing the few easy dungeons over and over. So my knowledge and memory of them is sparse and skewed. So, as I alluded to in previous lists, we're drifting more and more into vibes territory. But without further ado, let's kick it off from the bottom. In 12th place, we have Operation Mechagon Junkyard. So mechanically, and that is a pun, I don't really have major gripes with this dungeon. All of the boss encounters are straightforward enough. Although the last boss can be a bit tedious with party members needing to navigate up the platforms and channel on the pylons. Anyone who's gone back to farm for the mount that he drops knows how tedious this can be, although it does take much longer solo. It's also a bit unusual that he'll hover over a random third of the area each week and force you to choose between the other 2/3 to start your route. It's not frustrating, at least as someone who doesn't plan routes, but it is kind of bizarre. I'm also not a big fan of there being so much trash spread out everywhere. It's a very open area, so the trash sort of serves as the walls of the place. So it always feels like if you're not careful, then you might pull extra. And lastly, the biggest strike against this place is that it reuses the main Mechagon area that we did all of our Mechagon quests and daily chores on throughout patch 8.2. It feels very lazy and exemplifies why Blizzard shouldn't force a mega dungeon if they don't have enough material for it. I really think they should have just cut this one and put the entrance to Workshop up where the second half begins. Moving up to 11th place, we have Siege of Borealis. Originally, I used to hate the dungeon both for being more of an event than a location, and for a lot of its mechanics and flow. But the updates that the place received for The War Within Season 1 did a lot to improve my view of the place. It was actually arguably the easiest dungeon of Season 1. 4 huge improvements were A, using the Alliance version, and I know the Horde version was considered easier, as you're not operating on a narrow dock with shark-infested water surrounding you. B, making it so that the spotter's AoE doesn't do friendly fire, so that you aren't trying to drop circles on the mobs and thus your party. C, making Hadal, the third boss, not patrol around his room before being pulled. And D, making Vic Goth, the final boss, only have the starting tentacles instead of spawning demolishing terrors throughout, which was very nice because nobody likes feeling like they're falling behind, especially for the last boss fight, which has always been the worst part of this dungeon. Now, on the flip side, they did add a second wave to Hadal, but that's pretty inconsequential and not that difficult to avoid. So nowadays, the only parts that I would label as scary are the first boss if you're short on range or there just aren't any bombs around when he fixates you, and firing the cannons on the last boss because it feels like right after you fire the cannon, he drops a painful AoE on you that you need to avoid or use a defensive for. I really have to commend Blizzard here. They took a tense and claustrophobic dungeon and turned it into a fairly spacious and chill one. I still have gripes with its location reusing Borealis, and that's really the main reason it's so far down on this list. If it didn't include the hub area that Alliance players spent all of their time in, then at least it would feel less egregious. In 10th place, we have the Temple of Sethralis. So, unlike the previous 2 dungeons, this one does not violate any design elements that I usually dock dungeons for. And visually, even if it isn't my favorite aesthetic in the world, it really holds up as interesting and distinct. My relative distaste for the place is entirely due to the mechanics. The first and third bosses aren't particularly difficult ones to execute, but they were extremely punishing if you messed up even a little bit. Attacking the wrong target on the first boss meant near instant death, and you could be really screwed if you messed up your stacks on the third. I do feel I should mention the final encounter as it is a heal the boss fight, but I actually don't mind this one. It's fine. And aside from the bosses, there's a lot of tedious stuff to do for trash. There's a fairly easy orb dodging gauntlet leading up to the third boss, and a significantly harder one right after the third boss, though part of it can be disabled once one player engages the mobs at the end of it. And then immediately after that, there's the bit with the respawning trash where you have to pick up the 2 eyes and carry/throw them to the snake statue. It's just a lot of extra tedium and I was never happy to go there, which was frustrating because it was a common pick for my guildies. It feels like the kind of place that would be really fun in, say, time walking, but that just becomes frustrating in a high pressure environment like Mythic Plus. Next up in 9th place, we have the Motherlode. So the middle ranks of this list were pretty difficult for me to pick, and I could honestly move them around with some light convincing. I mean, I really enjoyed this place, though maybe my opinion will soon change as it will be part of the War Within's Season 2 dungeon pool. I remember some of the trash being annoying to me, which is not the case for every dungeon. The first boss isn't too bad, just dodging cones and punting foot bombs in. Azeroth was mostly just killing ads. The third boss, Rixa, is kinda fun as you use her propellant to push away the pools that she drops and get them out of the encounter, though you never really needed to aim it in my experience. Even managing it poorly, you usually had enough room to operate in. And Mogul Razdunk is just a well-designed fight all in all. Avoid his rotating conal, kite the missiles out of the group, kill ads, and bait the boss to land on the rockets. There's nothing I really dislike about this place, but there are just little bits here and there that hold it back. I also have mixed feelings about the location. I like the Kazan design, but it feels weird that we still can't go back to the Goblin starting zone, yet access different parts of the island here in BFA, via a boat. Seriously, the instance portals being in Zuldazar just feels weird, and I wish they would have just saved this place for when we go back to Kazan properly. And I haven't looked at everything from the upcoming Undermine patch, but I don't think we go above ground to the rest of the island. But I think you can access Undermine through either the Ringing Deeps or the new Kaja Coast area in Zuldazar. I'm not entirely sure. I know it's a really weird thing to consider, but all of this could really affect how I feel about the dungeon. We'll find out soon, I suppose. Sitting in 8th place, we have King's Rest. So this is another dungeon that I'm mostly familiar with just from farming the mount. And though I think the environment is really cool, and I like how it's a direct continuation of Atal Dazar, it's got some major factors holding it back. Chief among those is how the trash is implemented. You get to the first boss room and then spawn a bunch of trash behind you that you have to completely clear out, which is just a bit tedious. Then, after the first boss, you get locked in a room and have to kill the 4 monarchs who activate on a timer. After that, you're far less slowed down, but the path is still extremely narrow and linear. I think the bosses are all fine enough. Makimba has an interesting gimmick where the entombed player needs to wiggle their sarcophagus to indicate to the rest of the party where they are. The Council of Tribes has some fun banter, and King Dazar is a nice bit of lore. Other than the event trash early on, the worst part of the dungeon is probably the Shadow of Zul offering up commentary throughout. He just wasn't that fun of an addition. Also, I could swear there was a shortcut Paku totem that you could take after a while if you died, but I never see that anymore if I goof and run off the edge. Was that only in Mythic Plus, or was it removed, or what's going on here? In 7th place, we have the Underrot. Again, a place I am all too familiar with thanks to farming the Krog mount. It's definitely one of the most unique looking dungeons in the game due to all of the white with red flecks rot everywhere. I also really like that you can see the outside of the Uldir complex as you make your way throughout. It's just nice when you have that sense of connectivity, though I'm not as big of a fan of us getting teleported at the end down to the bottom of Tayloc's elevator shaft. There's no part of the dungeon that really stresses me out, but there are enough points where I'm minorly stressed out. Cragmaw can be a bit hectic, with you wanting to run over the grubs while possibly dodging the boss charge, while also wanting to kill any ads that did spawn. And Sporecaller Zancha can get a little bit messy too. So all in all, a fun place with a cool design, but it's just very middle of the pack for me. Kicking off the top half of this list, we have Operation Mechagon Workshop in 6th place. It is what I consider the much more interesting half of the Mega Dungeon. It's just a very compelling environment, and I would have loved to see more of it. I think I enjoy every one of the bosses, particularly Kujo and King Mechagon himself. Tussle Tonks is slightly annoying just because you would think that if you don't stand on the cracks, that you'd be safe from the floor saws, but their hitboxes are bigger than that, so you need to either stand on the larger outside panels or actively dodge the buzzsaws. And while I think the third boss is very fun, it can be kind of scary. The conveyor belt part is neat, but thankfully can be toggled off once someone makes it through. I'm less of a fan of the event trash after it, and I think the stealth portion is fine, but it can be frustrating if someone is having trouble with it. Thankfully, I'm pretty sure you unlock a shortcut once you're through it. The trash leading up to the final boss could be a bit rough, and I'm not a fan of being flown around, but that's getting a bit nitpicky. This one will also be returning in the upcoming season, so I'll probably sour on it and regret placing it this high, but that's life. In 5th place, we have Tol de Gore. I know that this place is absolutely despised, but funnily enough, I didn't get to run it enough to really learn why. I think because it was a very vertical dungeon with multiple floors, that there was a persistent issue of trash being pulled through the floors and walls. And if that's why, then I totally get it. Having your key depleted because of a bug out of your control would suck. But, because I rarely ever got to run it, I never experienced that problem, so I'm not jaded by it. Funny. But the dungeon itself is really cool. It's basically WoW's version of Alcatraz, as long as you ignore that other prison dungeon they named the Arcatraz, or Alcaz Island in Dustwallow Marsh. But this one definitely did the best job of living up to the fantasy. Like in a surprisingly high amount of WoW dungeons and raids, we start out by sneaking in through the sewer system, and then we slowly navigate our way up to the top. I didn't find any of the bosses to be particularly bothersome, and even the vehicle cannons are fairly simple to use. I guess I feel pretty neutral about the dungeon's mechanics, but the locale is enough to boost it up to near the top of the middle of the pack. In 4th place, we have Atal Dazar. This is just an easy place to like. It's nice and bright, being a literal city of gold. It's extremely non-linear, with the first 3 bosses being doable in any order without really costing you any time if you change the order. All of the bosses are fun too, with no mechanics that were particularly annoying. Arguably the hardest part is coordinating the totem kills on Volcall, but even that isn't really that hard. I also really like how Razan is roaming around underneath the central bridge amidst all of the bones. Plus a zombie T-Rex is just really cool, you know? I also like how the stairs slide into position when you head up to face Yasma. I wish I had more to say about it considering its placement on this list, but it's just a very sunny environment with nothing to annoy you and which doesn't take too long. A nice combination of factors that has earned it considerable fanfare. In 3rd place, we have what I believe is the most popular dungeon of the expansion, Freehold. This place is just a fun pirate paradise. Right off the bat, it starts off strong with you being bombarded by parrot droppings. The first boss isn't bad. You just need to watch for Sharkbait's charges and make sure to interrupt the heal. The second boss was similarly fine, with you mostly just needing to watch for Eudora's conal attack. And the final boss, Harlan's Suite, just had a very natural flow of dodging attacks, dropping puddles, and killing adds. And the environment was fantastic, pirate stuff everywhere, including 2 rope bridges to cross the ravine in the center of the dungeon. It isn't perfect though. The trash is a bit dense and can make runs feel claustrophobic. I remember there being a rotating event of sorts on the way to the second boss, but I think that was removed when it was revisited in Dragonflight. If so, then I consider that an improvement, as I never enjoyed it in the first place. And I'm not the biggest fan of the third boss and his shark toss mechanic. If it targeted you, you wanted it to stay close enough that it didn't start to fixate someone else, but not so close that it would catch up to you. Of course, you wanted to get it stuck on the blood puddles, but the mechanic felt very unreliable. So, a very fun dungeon overall. Understandably a fan favorite. But I just prefer the top 2 more, and I think I would even if you changed those bits I complained about. Our runner-up is Shrine of the Storm. I've been told I'm weird for liking this one, and that totally adds up because I was seldom drugged here during BFA. Admittedly, I love this place first and foremost for the vibes. I love watery cultist design. Perhaps that has something to do with the Shadow over Innsmouth being my favorite Lovecraft story. None of the bosses really irritated me in any way. The first boss was fun, having a charge you had to dodge and a targeted pushback you needed to resist, as well as a phase where he splits himself up. Plus, he had a really slick design. His name is Accuser. He's an accuser. The second boss duo wasn't bad either. Just stand in the wards, interrupt the caster, and avoid any tornadoes that spawn if you interrupt her while she has her buff. The third boss was pretty much just kite the orbs until someone gets the debuff and then they soak the orbs. And the last boss is basically kite the boss around, kill adds, and coordinate interrupts for the adds during the intermission phase. That's all well and good, but again, what I really adore about this place is the environment. I love Old God stuff when it's not too in your face. I love the giant octopus carving and the bridge you cross leading up to Lord Stormsong. And I love that it's raining. I think it rains. It definitely feels the way it feels when it rains. And I love the rain. I love the smell of rain, petrichor. This dungeon is awesome. Everyone else is wrong. And finally, in first place, we have Waycrest Manor. I'm sure nobody is surprised to see this one at the top. One poll that I found had Freehold as the most popular with 38% and Waycrest at second with 14%, which is kind of crazy. Those two had over half of the pie to themselves. And it's very easy to see why Waycrest is so loved. There aren't really any super scary trash pulls, and more importantly, all of the bosses are well designed and not too intimidating. The Heartsbane Triad is very well designed, as despite having many abilities, they rotate between the three of them so you never feel overwhelmed. The Soulbound Goliath is a very straightforward fight, only requiring the tank to dip him into the fire to reset his stacks, and for the Thorns to be killed quickly or negated with stun breaks. Rawl is just dodging cones and killing ads before they reach him. Lord and Lady Waycrest is pretty much just dodging swirlies, and Gorak Tool is just kill ads and burn their bodies to prevent them from respawning. So it's a low stress dungeon despite there being 5 bosses. But what pushes it into the stratosphere is the environment. It's a haunted mansion, for goodness sake. There are technically many paths you can take at the start, although I'm not sure what exactly triggers which ones are immediately available and which are locked. And there are a ton of nooks that you can explore when outside of M+, which is always a nice touch. And there's just a nice diversity within the haunted mansion concept. You've got the iconic foyer, a ballroom, a hunting lodge, a banquet hall, a courtyard, a kitchen, a cellar, a secret sub-basement ritual chamber, and the sub-basement dug into the earth that connects to Thros. The bosses are also cool. Witches, a wicker giant, an obese pig monster, a ghostly matron and her brain-rotted zombie husband that she controls, and of course Gorak Tool himself. Actually, while I don't think that his inclusion hurt the dungeon itself, I would have preferred if Gorak Tool had been cut out here and given his own Drust-themed raid. Technically, we only drive him back here anyways, for him to be defeated later by Jaina in a quest, which is a bit of a disappointment. And I think the Waycrest would have served as a perfectly fine ending to the dungeon. But that's probably my only complaint about the place, if you even want to call it that. And I have to say that the Drust with their wicker and ritual aesthetic is just very cool, and a great complement to the more traditional spoopy stuff present here. There's also Lady Waycrest delightfully throwing shade at you throughout the whole dungeon. Even the little touch of the organ being slammed whenever you kill one of the witches that ambush you. I just keep thinking of more things to praise it for. What a powerhouse of a dungeon. So all in all, BFA dungeons were pretty great. There were only a few that I didn't love, and I think the popular ones to hate were actually pretty neat. For this week's drawing, I obviously went with Waycrest Manor. My first instinct was to draw the foyer with Lady Waycrest on the stairs, but oh wait, that's already the loading screen. Since I didn't want to rip that off, I went with the next most memorable spot in the dungeon, which is the Ritual Chamber basement. That part is cool in and of itself, but you also have the pipe organ on the opposite side of the room that you hear throughout the manor. Even in this shot, you can see them embedded in the support pillars. I do like to think that Lady Waycrest just keeps her lumbering husband tucked away down here and out of the way, but I still chose not to include him here just because he was cluttering things up and was kind of hard to depict while all scrunched up. So just assume at this particular moment that he was deployed on some menial errand. But I think that's all I have to say on the matter. We will return in 13 weeks to rank the Legion dungeons. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next week. Bye-bye.